You're deadweight. Literally deadweight on this team. Derek Morrison's voice cut through the conference room like a knife, sharp and calculated, designed to draw blood in front of an audience. I sat at the end of the mahogany table, my laptop open to a spreadsheet nobody would ever understand, watching him perform his cruelty for the benefit of the junior analysts who'd learned to laugh when he was cruel. Everything you touch gets slower. Every project you join becomes someone else's problem. You'll never be anything in this company, Sophia. We all know it. You know it too, you're just too delusional to admit it. The room had gone quiet. Not the respectful quiet of people considering something important. The predatory quiet of people waiting to see if I would cry. If I would defend myself. If I would give Derek Morrison the emotional reaction he was performing for. So I didn't. I closed my laptop slowly, deliberately, and waited for my phone to vibrate. It took exactly 3 seconds. Derek was still talking. Something about my inability to close deals, my pathetic communication skills, the way I'd somehow managed to fail upward into a mid-level position despite having no business acumen whatsoever. When my cell phone buzzed against the glass table. Everyone heard it. Everyone's eyes flickered toward the phone and then back to Derek, who was so caught up in his monologue that he didn't even notice the interruption. I picked up the phone and read the text from Christopher Chun, chairman of the board. The vote is happening at 2 p.m. All board members are ready to move forward. Your acquisition will be announced immediately after. Congratulations, Ms. Park. You're about to own 51% of the company. Derek was still talking. I looked up from my phone and met his eyes across the table. Derek Morrison was a man who'd built his entire career on one simple strategy. Find people smaller than him and make them smaller still. He'd been doing it for 12 years. Everyone in the office knew that Derek never got in trouble because Derek was protected. His father was a venture capitalist who'd funded the company's Series A round. His uncle sat on the board. Derek Morrison was untouchable. Or at least he had been. Did you hear what I said? Derek leaned forward, his perfectly styled hair catching the fluorescent light. You're not responding because you know I'm right. You know you don't belong here. I heard you, I said calmly. I just don't particularly care about your opinion anymore. Derek's face darkened. Excuse me? You heard me. I stood up, closing my laptop. Thank you all for your time. I'll be back in an hour with an update for the company. I walked out of the conference room without waiting for his response. Behind me, I could hear Derek sputtering, his voice getting louder as he realized he'd lost his audience. It was the last time his voice would ever matter in this building. The acquisition had taken 18 months to orchestrate. 18 months of careful positioning, strategic investing, patient accumulation of shares through shell companies and private holdings. 18 months of pretending to be exactly what Derek Morrison thought I was. A mid-level manager with no ambition, no vision, no real power. I'd started at the company 6 years ago as a junior analyst. Everyone had written me off immediately. I was too quiet, too reserved, too interested in data instead of making a splash. I wasn't aggressive enough. I didn't network. I didn't seem hungry, which was fine. That invisibility was exactly what I needed. While Derek was making himself known, throwing his weight around, building alliances with the other aggressive personalities in the office, I was doing something much more valuable. I was learning how the company actually worked. Not the org chart, which was just a performance. I was learning the real structure, the real power dynamics, the real vulnerabilities. I discovered that the company's core technology was patented using methodologies I'd developed in my first year, but had never been credited for. When I looked into the patent registry, I found 47 innovations bearing my work that had been officially credited to other people. Most of them men, most of them significantly less intelligent than I was. I discovered that the company's revenue model was fundamentally unsustainable, and I quietly developed a restructuring plan that could fix it. I ran the numbers 17 times. The math was perfect. I never mentioned it to anyone. I discovered that 3 of the board members were open to selling the company if the price was right and the terms protected their investments. And I discovered, through careful research and quiet networking, that I could afford to buy it if I liquidated my personal investments and took on significant debt. So I did. The acquisition had been structured through a series of holding companies registered in Delaware. The funds came from a combination of my personal wealth, accumulated through careful investing over 6 years, and a loan I'd secured from a venture capital firm that owed me a favor from my previous life, before I'd decided to disappear into corporate anonymity. Nobody in the office knew. Nobody at the company had any idea that every share purchase, every quiet investor meeting, every strategic conversation I'd had with the board members had been building toward this single moment. The moment when I would own them. At 1:47 p.m., I walked into the boardroom on the executive floor. Christopher Chin was already there, along with the other 6 board members. My lawyer, a brilliant woman named Margaret Wu, stood beside me with the final documents. "Ms. Park," Christopher said, standing up to shake my hand. "We were just discussing the terms. 51% of the company, all voting shares. You'll have complete control over the executive board, hiring and firing authority, and full strategic direction. The current CEO, James Rothstein, has agreed to stay on in an advisory capacity if you want him, but he's also prepared to resign effective immediately. What's your preference?" "James stays," I said, sitting down. "But he reports to me now, not the other way around." "Understood," Christopher said. "The announcement will go out at 3 p.m. via press release. We're framing this as a strategic acquisition of a controlling stake by a private investor group. We don't need to mention you personally at first. That'll give you a week to prepare your public statement." "No," I said. "Put my name on it. I want everyone to know exactly who owns this company now." Margaret looked at me with surprise. "That's not typical strategy for a hostile acquisition." "It's not hostile," I interrupted. "The board is supportive. And I want Derek Morrison to understand, in the most public way possible, exactly what just happened to him." Christopher smiled. "I think I like the way you operate, Ms. Park." By 3:15 p.m., the press release had gone out to every major financial outlet. Sophia Park, former mid-level analyst at Tech Venture Solutions, has acquired majority control of the company through a private investment group. Park will assume the role of chief executive officer effective immediately. I watched Derek's face when he got the news. He was standing by the water cooler on the 4th floor. I was watching via the security camera feed I'd pulled up on my phone, and he was literally pale, white-faced, shaking. He didn't come back to his desk. He left the building entirely. At 4 p.m., I called an all-hands meeting in the auditorium. Every employee showed up. They could sense something huge had happened. The stock price had already jumped 22% based on the acquisition news. People were confused, excited, nervous about what a new owner might mean. I walked out onto the stage, and the room went silent. "For the last 6 years," I began, "I've watched this company from the inside. I've watched the talent we have. I've watched the innovations we're capable of creating. And I've watched the way we've been run, not optimized for that talent, but optimized for the people who like being loud about their success." I could see Derek in the crowd. He was standing in the back, still pale, still shocked. "A lot of people have told me over the years that I don't belong here," I continued. "That I'm not aggressive enough, not ambitious enough, not the right fit for a tech company. They told me I'd never amount to anything. Today, I became the majority shareholder of this company. So I want to make one thing very clear. Their assessment was wrong. They just didn't understand what ambition actually looks like when it's not performing for an audience." I could feel the shift in the room. I could see people's expressions changing as they started to put the pieces together. "Effective immediately, we're making several changes," I announced. "First, we're implementing a merit-based promotion system that doesn't depend on who can talk the loudest in a meeting. Second, we're conducting a full review of all patent assignments and intellectual property. Third, we're restructuring our revenue model based on a plan that was developed 6 years ago, but ignored because it came from the wrong person." I paused and looked directly at Derek. "Fourth, Derek Morrison is fired for chronic workplace harassment and creating a hostile work environment. Security will escort him out of the building. Anyone else who has engaged in similar behavior will be given one opportunity to stop. Take that opportunity seriously." The room exploded. Not in anger, in relief. I could see it on people's faces. They'd been waiting for someone to actually do something about Derek. They'd been waiting for consequences to actually exist. Derek tried to argue with security as they escorted him out, but his voice was small. His authority had evaporated the moment I'd announced the acquisition. He was just a man now, not a protected creature of privilege. Over the next 3 months, I restructured the company completely. I implemented the revenue model I developed 6 years ago. Revenue jumped 34% in the first quarter. I paid back my acquisition debt in full using the company's operational cash flow. I created a new position, Chief Innovation Officer, and I offered it to every person in the company who'd been quietly developing ideas that had been stolen or ignored. 37 people applied. I hired 5. They were brilliant. They were hungry. They were exactly the kind of people who'd been invisible under Derek Morrison's regime. I also discovered something interesting in the patent records. Derek's father, the venture capitalist who'd funded the original round, had made a series of terrible decisions with those funds. He'd invested in 8 different companies, and 7 of them had failed spectacularly. The only one that had succeeded was Tech Venture Solutions. Derek's uncle, the board member, had been funneling company funds into private investments without authorization. I had Margaret Wu present the evidence to the SEC. That investigation would take 2 years. Derek's father would lose nearly everything. Derek's uncle would negotiate a settlement. Derek himself would face a lawsuit from the SEC for his involvement in unauthorized trading on insider information. But I didn't have to do any of that to make my point. I'd already made it the moment I walked into that conference room as the new owner of the company he'd thought he was untouchable in. 6 months after the acquisition, I was sitting in my corner office, the same office Derek had occupied during his time at the company, when James Rothstein knocked on my door. "I wanted to talk to you about something," he said, closing the door behind him. "Derek's been reaching out to me. He's trying to get me to convince you to rehire him. He says he's changed. He says he wants to apologize. Do you believe him?" I asked. "No," James said. "I think he's desperate. I think he's facing consequences for the first time in his life, and it's terrifying him." "Good," I said. "That's exactly the point. Can I ask you something?" James sat down across from me. "Why didn't you just let me know what you were planning? Why did you let Derek humiliate you for 6 years?" "Because I wasn't ready," I said simply. "I needed time to learn how the company worked. I needed time to understand the real structure of power here. And I needed Derek to not see me as a threat. The moment you show ambition in a place like this, the predators notice. They start trying to destroy you before you become dangerous. I didn't want to be destroyed. I wanted to be invisible until I was untouchable. And now I'm both," I said. "Nobody can touch me because I own the building they work in. And I'm not invisible anymore, but by the time they realized who I really was, it was too late to do anything about it." James nodded slowly. "You're a terrifying woman, Sophia." "Thank you," I said. "I take that as a compliment. It was meant as one." A year after the acquisition, I sat in an interview with the Silicon Valley Business Journal. The interviewer asked me the question I knew was coming. "What do you say to the people who said you'd never amount to anything?" I smiled. "I don't say anything to them. I let my success speak for itself. I took a company that was being run into the ground by mediocre men with good connections, and I transformed it into one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the Valley. I did that not by being loud about my ambitions, but by being strategic about them. I did that by learning while everyone else was performing. I did that by being patient enough to wait for my moment." "What about Derek Morrison specifically?" the interviewer pressed. "He's suing the company for wrongful termination, claiming the sexual harassment allegations against him were fabricated." "Derek Morrison," I said carefully, "is facing the consequences of his own behavior. The allegations against him were documented by employees who came forward after I created a system where they could do so safely. I didn't fabricate anything. I just finally gave people permission to tell the truth. Some people say you're being vindictive, that you orchestrated your acquisition specifically to get revenge on someone who was mean to you. Some people would be wrong," I said. "I orchestrated my acquisition because I believed in this company and its potential. Derek Morrison is simply a casualty of that process. He's someone who had to be removed because his leadership style was toxic and destructive. That's not revenge. That's business. But we both knew it wasn't entirely true. It was, at least in part, revenge. Beautiful, calculated, perfectly executed revenge against a man who'd spent years punching down because he thought nobody would ever punch back. The difference was that my revenge was also objectively good for the company. Derek's removal made everyone's lives better. His termination allowed for innovation and culture that simply couldn't exist while he was in the building. So when people asked me about it later, and they always did, I would tell them the truth. I didn't destroy Derek Morrison to hurt him. I destroyed him because he was in the way of something better. The fact that it also felt incredible was just a bonus." 2 years after the acquisition, Tech Venture Solutions was valued at $2.3 billion. I'd turned down 3 acquisition offers from larger tech companies. I owned 51% of the company, worth approximately $1.17 billion. I was 34 years old. Derek Morrison had moved to Austin, Texas, where he was working at a smaller firm in middle management. His lawsuits had been settled. His reputation had been destroyed. He would never recover to his previous level of professional prominence. Sometimes I wondered what he thought about when he woke up in the morning. Did he regret the years he'd spent humiliating people? Did he understand the precise moment everything had changed? Did he realize that his contempt for my invisibility was the exact thing that had allowed me to move past him without him ever seeing it coming? I hope so. I hoped that he thought about me regularly. I hoped that he understood that somewhere in Silicon Valley, there was a woman he'd called deadweight, and that woman had become his professional death. That was the real power. Not the money, though the money was nice. Not the title, though the title was satisfying. It was the knowledge that I'd been underestimated, overlooked, dismissed as unambitious, and that I'd used that dismissal as camouflage while I built a future that left my detractors in the dust. Deadweight had become the majority shareholder, and Derek Morrison would spend the rest of his career wondering how he'd missed it coming.